My name is Bob Myers. My wife and I tell in tandem as the Story Peddlers. We got started one evening when I took my wife to a performance of a couple that came through our area from North Carolina. And it was snowy and I didn't want her out by herself. And I took her, and on the way out, I said, you know, we could do that. That was around 1984. And since then, we've been working on telling stories. We told our first story professionally 20 years ago. I was an electrical engineer, and my wife was a children's librarian. And you may ask what those things have to do with storytelling, and the librarian is a lot easier to connect than the electrical engineer. But I found out when we went to this performance that my family had always told stories. I really hadn't realized it until then. And my wife will tell you, if you ask her, that she knew every one of my relatives before she ever met them. Of course, sometimes it was hard to keep a straight face when she met them, but she knew them all. And storytelling gives us an opportunity to work with children and to help them see literature as an important part of their life, and fun. We figure that if you don't have fun telling stories, the children won't have fun. And if the children don't have fun, they won't listen and they won't learn. So primary motivation in our storytelling is to get them giggling and having a good time and slip in a little message. Teachers can use storytelling in so many ways. Some of our programs come with pre-activities, activities for teachers to do to get the children interested in storytelling so that they can recognize certain things as they're told. They also come with vocabulary, because we use some strange words in some strange ways, which is part of the real power for storytelling. This is a natural way for children to learn vocabulary. One of our stories uses the word stupendous. We use this with kindergarten kids. And when those children leave, having heard that story, they know what that word means. So there's all kinds of ways to use stories. We hope that they'll take one of our stories and go get a book that's similar or by a similar author and read it. In fact, that's what keeps us going, is hoping that we can get a kid to read a book he wouldn't normally. Perhaps he's only interested in nonfiction. And we'll tell a story that's fiction, and he'll go get a fiction book to see if it's the same. Or perhaps a child that only reads fiction, and we'll do something that's true, and we'll tell them that they can find more about it. Just like I did with the wide-mouthed frog. I told those kids to go check when they said that the wide-mouthed frog had a nose. I told them to go check to be sure that frogs had noses. Not one of those children is probably sure. But when they go get the book, what they'll find out is that the frog has noses, but it's a very, very special nose. It has like eyelids that close it, so when he goes underwater, water doesn't flow in. It's a wonderful way to get kids interested in things and teach them very interesting things.
I'm Kathie Myers, and I'm a person in development. I didn't graduate college until I was quite old, and then I got a master's degree in library science. And on my way to the master's degree, I discovered storytelling. And my husband and I began telling stories shortly after I completed that degree, and I worked in the library as a children's librarian for over 20 years. And we were telling stories most of that time. And it got to the place where we had to make a choice. Were we going to work at a job that I loved? I mean, it was a great job. Or were we going to walk off that cliff and tell stories full time? And because of personal things in our family, we decided we were just going to try it. We could always go sell something at Walmart. And we did. And that's been 10 years ago, and it's been an adventure. When we started telling stories, I was thinking more in terms of working with adults, because I worked with children in my library life, and I wanted a little difference. But we found that the need and our skills really were with young people. And on the road to the storytelling, we found that working with kids to make literature and books and reading and writing an important part of their life was an important part of our life. And that's when we choose stories and when we put a program together, we think in those terms. How can we make kids really have a good time right now in the present, and how will there be something left over for them to benefit from because they've heard a story? The way that storytelling can relate to the curriculum is as creative as the teachers are. The peanut butter story, she could have the kids replicate it. She could have the kids figure out how that story works and why that story has to be done visually, why they aren't going to listen to that story on an audio cassette. With the Six Foolish Fishermen story, there's a lot of physicality in that story for kids who learn physically instead of learn by books. There's all this math things related to it. There's how to thinking skills. You know, why did that work and why did that not work? Could they write their own noodle tale that would have a little something that somebody didn't do right? The Wide Mouth story is just mostly fun. But again, kids could reconstruct that story. They could change the characters in that story. It could become a part of creative drama. It could become a writing exercise, although that's another story that's strongly visual. And then, of course, the Aesop's Fable. That particular story we often use in a story in a program for saying no to drugs. And we use it that when you let something like a drug into your life, it can explode like the Daddy Frog did. But you could use it for any kind of a thing. It doesn't have to be related to that. And Aesop's, I always want the kids to go and read Aesop and figure out why those stories have been around that long. And I really like that when they read an Aesop story, they can tell why it's important to them, what application it has for them now. And each class member's application may not match the other class member's application. And that's really important because a person who hears a story hears what they need to hear at the time they hear the story. And it may not be the same thing. The story from the prodigal son in the Bible is certainly has different meanings to different people and different points of their lives. And I think most good stories are that way.